Hello, I'm here at the Tegallalang Rice Terraces, and the topic of today's video is the importance of ecology in shaping a political economy. So I've been talking in recent videos about political economy, about how it affects certain things, that is, the relationship between the functions of economics in a society and the political systems and political organizations, as well as values that are set up. Now, what does ecology have to do with this, and what exactly do I mean by ecology? Well, by ecology I just mean the same thing that you would assume in a biology class, right? Every natural environment has a certain ecology, that is, there is a system. There's a system of inputs and outputs of different kinds of creatures and organisms that play different kinds of roles, as well as natural resources that are available for the growth and well-being of those organisms. And one's ecology, in a literal biological sense, actually matters a lot for the kinds of political economy that can be set up. So, for example, I'm here in this large rice terrace, right? And terracing is a farming technique whereby we discovered a way, where many cultures discovered a way to grow food on land that was otherwise previously unarable, right? So terracing is very important as a discovery because it opens up a bunch of non-flat land that is very hilly or very mountainous terrain to farming, right? And of course, with the advent of agriculture, this becomes extremely important. Now, in an ecological sense, something like the innovation of terracing actually has a huge effect on a given society, potentially, right? So if you're in a very mountainous region or a very hilly region and there's not a lot of arable land, well, without terracing, you've got problems like you can't expand very much. It's very hard for you to grow a lot of food, so it's hard to have a larger population. You also have the issue that perhaps you're moving around or you're living a pastoralist lifestyle, and so as a result of this, you have to keep moving different things around. You're shepherding animals, and you're not staying in one place. However, with the advent of terracing, well, some of these dynamics change. And again, I'm just using terracing as an example here to illustrate what I'm talking about when I say that the ecology shapes the political economy. So, you discover terracing, let's say. And what happens? Well, as soon as you discover the terracing, you can grow more food. All of this land that you were maybe not really using at all suddenly becomes opened up. So that changes the land apportionment, the dynamics in terms of ownership of land, who gets what land and where that land goes, as well as the fact that now you have the ability to do farming. And maybe in a previous situation, the people that were living in a region, let's say a very mountainous or hilly region, couldn't even really do much farming at all. And so that changes, of course, the local economy, right? Because now you've got the advent of farming. As many people know, when you move from a hunter-gatherer or nomadic society to a farming society, actually some very fundamental things change. For example, the keeping of debts and payments in a very meticulous way, right, through a ledger. The reason is because it's very impractical and not really that useful, to be honest, to track a lot of debts and credits in a pastoralist nomad society, right? Because the things that you, if you're moving around from place to place to find new food sources, either for yourselves or for your livestock, then nothing that you take with you, for the most part, you can keep. There's very few things aside from some durable goods, wood. Maybe you've got some metal things. Maybe clothing. Certain kinds of equipment, especially made tools. But in general, there's not a lot of things that you're going to accumulate, and you don't want to accumulate a lot because you're moving all the time. And so, as a result of this, with the advent of agriculture, suddenly you get the tracking of credits and debts. And part of the reason for this is that, well, if you're growing lots of stuff, A, you need to figure out how you're going to sell that stuff. B, you have to manage that stuff, because usually the quantities that you're working with, unlike, again, in a nomadic or pastoralist society, you're not, killing an animal or discovering an open plot of food or land, and then, harvesting it right away, eating all of it that's there, and then moving on to the next place. Unlike in that situation, you are actually storing up large quantities of the crop that you're growing during the harvest, and you're using that, you're doling it out either to yourselves or you're selling it to others over a longer period of time. And maybe you're even figuring out different ways of storing something like grain, for example, keeping it dry and then managing it in larger and larger quantities. And so accounting, literally accounting, becomes something that you need when you switch into an agriculturalist mode. And this is not something that you need in a nomadic or pastoralist society. Obviously, there's basic concepts of reciprocity, gift giving, someone owes something someone does something for someone. All these kinds of things still exist. But accounting, keeping track of credits and debits, is actually a system that comes about as a result of the advent of agriculture. Now, what does this have to do with politics? So far, all I've been talking about is economics. Well, again, when we're talking about political economy, we're talking about the ways in which economic situations affect the political conditions and arrangements and values that are viable, right? And so if you have something like, again, we're using this example of agriculture, the advent of ledgers, the advent of accounting, well, then you also now suddenly have to deal with contracts, right? And what is contracts? Well, contracts need enforcement, right? And as well as the fact that, just in terms of raw material conditions, you can do different things in an agriculturalist mode that you can't do in a nomadic pastoralist mode. For example, raise a large army and feed that army on cheap grain. These are things that you're not able to do when you're relying primarily on discovering wild crops in nature or killing livestock, which are very expensive and take a long time to raise, in order to feed yourselves and your family. You're not going to have a very large army that does that, generally speaking. Now, of course, we can talk about the Mongols and the steppe people and so forth, and there obviously have been larger armies that come out of nomadic pastoralist societies, but generally the largest armies that have ever been created were all coming from agriculturalist societies. The other thing is that it changes the values of that society. So in a previous society, like a nomadic pastoralist society or a society that's relying on a lot of hunting, for example, in order to feed itself, well, then the values of that society are going to be around basically who is the best hunter, right? Who is good at finding the food or capturing that food, killing that food, and providing, raw materials for the others. And remember, in a hunter society, the food, the animals themselves aren't just used for food, but they're used for every aspect of the local economy. The animals themselves are harvested for their skins, for their bones, for their sinews, for anything that they could possibly use. They're going to get out of those animals, right? And so those animals are extremely valuable, the most valuable things to those societies, and therefore the people that are good at killing or in a shepherding situation raising those animals are the ones who are the most valuable. Whereas in an agriculturalist mode, well, again, you suddenly have this weird thing where we're like saving up crops, we're tending to our farm. Remember, farming is a very, very long-term, slow activity relative to hunting. And then we're managing those resources over a long period of time, and then we're selling them in the market. And so the person who's very valuable in that society is the person who's really good at farming or managing the crop yields. And that's a very different kind of skill set, right? The person who's very good at managing a farm and managing, large quantities of food and then selling them over time, keeping them maintained, managing this, the distribution lines, things like that. It's a very different kind of mode than someone who's out hunting, right? And so, and again, as I said earlier, you have the introduction of contract law with these kinds of things. You also have the necessity for weights and measurements, because you're moving large quantities of stuff around, and you're selling that stuff in order to trade for other things that you need, right? And so, as a result of this, you get into a different kind of political and economic situation that comes about from this. And that changes everything. That changes everything about what you value, what people want to do, what systems of organization they're willing to set up, and how that society decides to organize itself. So, this is an important consideration, even now, even in the 21st century, because of the fact that despite the fact that we have all kinds of new modern conveniences and modern technology and the ability to do and manipulate nature in all kinds of ways that were previously unimaginable, we still have to deal with the physical reality of local ecologies. That is, every nation state, every people that belongs to a state is embedded in a particular geography, and that geography comes with it a particular kind of ecology of natural resources and organisms. And this changes what kinds of political systems we can set up. Now, of course, technology, this channel is all about the interplay between philosophy and technology and how technology changes our relationship to power and ourselves. Technology allows for global trade, the vast kinds of specialization and arbitrage and comparative advantage, and so we can do a lot more with a lot less than we used to be able to do. And places that were previously stuck, like this place, in a particular kind of ecology with, let's say, very little arable land or very few natural resources relative to other places, now have the ability to trade what value they can create. In this case, I would assume that most of this value here is no longer the rice, although there is rice growing all along these terraces. Most of the value that's created here is actually due to tourism, right? And so it's money coming from other places outside that are doing different things, and then they're bringing it in because, well, they've got this natural wealth, right? This is a kind of natural wealth. Having beautiful places to go that other people want to see and other people want to enjoy is its own kind of natural wealth. So, even in the 21st century, your ecology determines your political economy. And when we think about the best state situation, the best state government, the best values for a state, they're always going to be tied to very closely the local ecology. And in fact, what you actually want is you want something like a state political fit, right? We know of product market fit from Startup World. Well, you should think about state and political arrangements or political economy as its own kind of fit, right? What is the geography of a place? What is the ecology of a place? And what political system are we setting up that is best in line with that? And if you think that problem through, and if you consider it from first principles, you'll realize that it's impossible for every place to share in the same kind of political dynamics. And in fact, any attempt to do so would be against nature and pragmatically just infeasible. What we actually have to do is we have to consider the local environments, the local ecology of a given place that's set up. And then from there, we have to derive the appropriate, the best fit political and economic system that makes sense for those people in that place at that time. Thank you for watching.
Money, money, money. We just wanna make the world dance. Forget about a price tag. Hey, the better, huh? The better.
Rice terrace. Rice.